قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني وسبحان الله وما أنا من المشركين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay. Inshallah, today I'm going to be talking about the topics about the behaviors and how we, the girls and the boys, should behave, and what Islam actually tells and what Islam says, how the boys and the girls should behave themselves in terms of in every environment, whether it's at work, whether it's in college, whether it's meeting people, whether it's with their parents and everything else, inshallah. And inshallah I'll be talking about some subjects on it. As you know, this is something big, and part of my talk, inshallah, I won't be able to cover everything, but inshallah I'll be touching on certain aspects, inshallah. Now, what's the definition of behavior, as a definition before we actually start? This word behavior is actually is defined as the manner of acting or controlling yourself. So this is the definition of what behavior is. And as you know, it's important that living in the UK, we are aware of what Islam says and how Islam tells us in terms of how we behave ourselves in the community, at work and everything else. Now, in life we interact and we meet different people, everyone from different walks of life, whether it's from different countries, people from different religions and everything else. And we are also interacting and talking to them, working with them. And eventually also, during that interaction, we'll also meet people from the opposite gender, whether it's, as I said, male meeting female, female meeting male, whether it's at work, at school, college and everything else. Now, part of this is important that we know what Islam actually says in terms of how we should interact with them, whether it's talking to them and then behaving around the opposite gender. And it's important that we know this, as Islam is a way of life. And part of that way of life, Islam has also told us rules on how to behave ourselves. It's important that when we meet the opposite gender, that there is no form of physical contact. As you know, that Islam does not permit as you know, it's important that Islam says that when we meet the opposite gender, there's no actual contact involved, whether it's actual physical contact, staring at them, and doing things that Islam does not permit. And in chapter 24, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says between verse 30 to 31, tell the believing men to lower their gaze and to be mindful of their chastity. This will be most conducive for their purity. And verily, God is all knowing, aware of what they do. And tell the believing women. You see, the ayah is not just only referring to men, but also referring to the women as well. Tell the believing women to lower their gaze and to be mindful of their chastity and not to display their charms beyond what they may be apparent thereof. Now, in terms of this ayah of the Quran, why was it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually bring this ayah? As you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who created us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who brought us into this world. So therefore, Allah knows us better than we know ourselves. And because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought this ayah, and the purpose of this ayah is to block, not just block but prevent or cut the roots of anything that may lead to haram. And in that case, adultery. And as this is what a threat to what? Family structure and also morals within a society. That's not the only thing. Another thing is when you as an individual are about to commit an act which is haram, but you stop yourself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards you for that in that case. And now referring to this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to lower your gaze. By lowering your gaze, not only are you preventing yourself from committing haram, but you also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is rewarding you for that action you're doing. And in a saying, the Prophet ﷺ said, no Muslims whose eyesight falls inadvertently on the beauties of a Muslim when he lowers his gaze, but Allah will credit for him a worship, he will appreciate its sweetness in his heart. And in that case, it's important that we as individuals, we know what Islam says, and again, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually wanting from us and how we should behave ourselves. In another verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, "O you who believe, follow not the footsteps of Satan, and whosoever follows the footsteps of Satan, then verily he commands what is indecent and wrong." And the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again put this ayah is because Shaitan knows what our weaknesses are. And part of that weakness, he tries to tempt us and gets us to do things that are haram. And that's the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning us that we should be careful and we should not fulfill and commit the haram. And you see, look in the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, do not follow the footsteps. You see, the reason why Allah says this is because the moment you take one foot towards haram, Shaitan has already prepared the next step to take. It's actually prepared it for you, and that second step will eventually be a series of further steps which eventually cause you to commit the haram. And that's what is important, that we actually protect ourselves, and that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning us to be careful and to be mindful. So now, since I've actually introduced the topic, some of you may be thinking, okay, does that mean I'm not allowed to speak to the opposite gender at all? Or is haram, or is it a crime? No, that's not the case. And I will actually tell you proof from the Quran as well as hadith, inshallah, that interaction, as long as it is with decency, as a meaning that you do not go beyond what Islam says, then this halal, there's nothing wrong with it. And one example is in Surah Al-Qasas in chapter 28, when Musa alayhi was running away from Fir'aun. And when he actually killed an individual before he received the message. And then he went to an area called Al-Madyan. So the verse translating saying, when Moses arrived at the wells of Madyan, he found there a large group of men who were watering their herd, and at some distance from them, they came upon two women who were keeping back their flock. He asked them, "What is the matter with you?" They answered, "We cannot water our animals until the herdsmen drive theirs away. And our father for we are weak, and our father is very old." So he watered their flock, and he withdrew into the shade, and then he said, "O my sustainer, verily I am in dire need of any good that you may bestow upon me." Now, even though these two women and Musa alayhi salam, they were non-mahram in a sense that they should not be close to each other, but again, look at the manner in which Musa alayhi salam spoke to them. He intended to help them, but there was this line in a sense that he did not go beyond the help. And it's important that we as individuals know how we actually speak and converse with the opposite gender. Now, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, as you know, the Prophet ﷺ, not was he there just for the Sahabas, the men, but also were there for the Sahabiya, in which that the deen he taught them as well as the women and the men. And at the time, one time, what happened was a Sahabiya by the name of Qayla and Maria, a female companion, came to the Prophet ﷺ, and she said, "O Messenger of Allah, I am a woman who buys and sells." And then she asked him about bargaining. And when it comes to business, you need to be able to buy and sell and be able to bargain. In terms of when you're buying a product, you want to get it at the cheapest price, and you want to sell it on. And now, she was able to talk to the Prophet ﷺ in a way that she can ask her for her question. And the Prophet ﷺ responded to her and answered her question. But again, there's no such thing as there being bad interaction. But again, there is a way in which the Prophet ﷺ did, and we are supposed to follow that way, inshallah. Anas, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, narrated about the day of the Battle of Uhud. And he said that he saw Aisha radiallahu anha, the daughter of Abu Bakr, and Salama rolling up their dresses. And they saw their leg bangles while they were carrying water skins on their back and emptying them in the mouth of the wounded people. And they would return and fill them again and empty their mouths in the wound of the people. Again, the interaction between the opposite gender occurred, but again, there was no indecency, meaning that it actually led to something that would develop and eventually cause an act of haram to happen. Now, at the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, when he was a Khalif, he appointed a woman, Shifa bint Abdullah, as an administrator of the market. So she was responsible for looking after what was happening within the market. Again, she was from a person of responsibility, but again, the main gist of what I'm saying is that as long as the interaction between the opposite gender does not lead to things that would lead to haram, that is the most important thing. As you know, the Prophet ﷺ, in the hadith to this effect, he said that I have been sent only for the purpose of perfecting good morals. And part of that is important that we as individuals who believe in the Prophet ﷺ and who believe that his way of life will be the way that will lead us to success, is that we implement his way of life. And in that case, both the girls and the boys, the men and the women, all in general, we have to follow the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And from this hadith, we can understand that it's important that we as individuals put whatever action we do, we do the things that the Prophet ﷺ has allowed us to do. And in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, I am a guarantee of a house in Jannah, the highest part of Jannah, for the one who makes his behavior good. Meaning the person who works on his behavior, the person who works on his good mannerism, whether it's dealing with people, whether it's non-Muslims, people of the opposite gender, whether it's dealing with the parents, dealing with the brothers and sisters. Again, because good manners is part of the deen, and that itself is part of worship, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward us for that. And what I want to do, inshallah, as you know, this is something immense and big. I just want to touch on some topics, inshallah, if Allah wills. And one of the things that I want to talk about, inshallah, is when we as individuals are walking on the street, when we are at our home, and when we are with friends, whether it's at college, work, and everything else. It is important that when we are walking on the street, we behave in a good manner, and that we follow the etiquettes that the Prophet ﷺ has laid down for us. And one of the etiquettes in particular that we should be following is when we are walking, we should not rush, as we could bump into other people and cause an offense or cause harm to others. And when we walk, we should walk with our eyes lowered, as in to ensure that we do not look at things that is haram. And as you know, living in this country, people may not be aware of the teaching of Islam, and some people are not aware of the modest dressing. So it's important that as individuals that we are following the steps to ensure that we keep away from haram and that will lead us to commit haram. And when we are walking on the street, if we see anything harmful, we should put it to the side. As you know, that if you remove an object that may cause harm to an individual and you move it to the side, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you for that, as if that would be an act of worship itself. And so these are some of the etiquette in terms of when we walk on the street. And when an individual recites, when they're in the bazaar, in the markets, and they read the dua, and the English translation, there is none worthy of worship besides Allah. He is all by himself. He has no partner. He is the kingdom, to him is all praise. He gives and takes life, and he is all by himself, and he will not die in his hand. It's all good, and he has control over all things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward him for reciting the dua, especially in the bazaar. Is an area which the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not happen. And by you remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you for that. Now, when we are at home, when we are speaking to our parents, whether we are speaking to our brothers and sisters, it's important that we, as individuals, treat them the way we like to be treated, which the Prophet ﷺ in the Hadith to Nurse says that you should treat others the way you like to be treated. And it's important that both boys and girls, in particular, they need to learn to do what? To respect their parents, especially the fathers and the mothers. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Ayat Yusuf says that obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet, and following that He says to obey the parents. Because the parents are the ones who brought the children to this world, and they are the ones who will look after and care for them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making sure from this ayat to the English translation, Allah is putting an importance, because it's the parents who actually are looking after the children, and the children should show what? Gratefulness, to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also to respect the parents. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting the emphasis on the importance of respecting the parents. And as you know, we are living in a society in which many people do not show respect to their parents, and many people who are not fulfilling and looking after their parents. And Islam is again bringing us back to this, that is, looking after the parents and respecting them is important, because this is part of our deen, and this is part of our actually worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done what? He's commanded us to do so. And as you know, one of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Bukhari and Muslim, it was reported the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, a Sahabi asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "O Messenger of Allah, who is the most worthy of my best conduct, as in my best behavior?" And he answered, "Your mother, your mother, your mother, then your father, then the next and the next." And this hadith puts the emphasis and repeated the mother 3 times. Why? Because it is your mom who is the one who brought you into this world. Not only has she brought you into this world, but because she suffered from the pain of actually giving you birth to you. And again, putting the emphasis on that we should respect our parents. And as you know, when we as individuals are youngsters, we like to go out, we go places. And as you know, as parents, they'll be worried about if the children come late or they go places that they may not be aware of. And it is one of the things I advise, that we as individuals, we should, whether we're old or young, does not matter what age we are, we inform our parents where we're going, because it puts their mind at ease, so that they do not worry. So in case they come late, the individual comes late, their parents know where they are. Because at the end of the day, when a person, mom and dad, they're the ones who brought them to this one, they're the ones who looked and cared for them. And they will worry naturally for their children. And it's important as youngsters, we as individuals, do not worry our parents. And in that case, my advice, inshallah, is that we inform them where we are going, inshallah. And from then, hopefully, at least that itself will remove any worries from our parents, inshallah. It's important that when we meet our friends, and we're socializing and talking to our friends, that we try to adhere to some etiquettes. And whether it's involving joking, whether it's talking about every aspect, whether it's work and everything else. And one of the things in particular I want to just touch on is joking. Now, there's nothing wrong with joking. Everyone should be allowed to joke. Even the Prophet ﷺ joked with the Sahabas. But there was a line that was drawn in which when the Prophet ﷺ, he joked with the Sahabas, there was no line. There was no mocking of others. There was not actually looking down on others. And this is important because this will lead to hatred and enmity. Because when you look down and when you mock others, and you make that person, everyone else laughs at that individual, that person will eventually have a feeling of hatred towards you. And this is something which is not allowed in Islam. And it's important that when we do so, we watch what we say, because whatever we say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge us in the Day of Judgment for whatever, and everything we say is recorded by the two malaika. One who's recording the good action, and the other is recording the actions that are bad. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Hujurat, He says to this effect, "O you who believe, let not a group scoff at another group. It may be that the latter are better than the former, and nor let some women scoff at other women. It may be that the latter are better than the former." And from this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that do not look down as that individual, because they may be actually better than you. They may be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than you. They may be worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than you. They may be God-fearing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than you. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from this ayah, Allah is saying that you should not do so, because you don't know whether they are better than you. And Ibn Kathir in his tafsir, he said that what is meant by here is looking down on them, is belittling them or making fun of them, as this is haram. And this is one of the characteristics of what? Hypocrites. And now this is one of the things that we should, as boys and girls in particular, in the youth, we should try to avoid these behaviors. That when we joke, we should joke, but as long as we do not do these actions which may actually lead us to haram. Sometimes when people make jokes, some may make jokes about other people's appearance, or maybe the way they walk, or maybe something that they may have. But you should be careful, because by making a mockery of whatever there is the case, whether it's the appearance or the way they walk, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may actually bring that thing that you're making fun of them onto you. And it's not something advisable and something that we should avoid. And this is not part of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, because the Prophet ﷺ, he respected every individual, and he ensured that the individual who is Muslim, this is the definition he says, a Muslim is what? A person who his tongue and his hand does not cause harm to the other. And that we as individuals, when we are actually doing things and we're actually saying things, we should try to adhere to what the Prophet ﷺ says. And hopefully, inshallah, I'm going to just finish on this last point, inshallah, that sometimes we laugh too much and we make too much jokes, and we should try not to do so, because when you laugh too much, you make too much jokes, what happens is that it makes your heart harden, and in which the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes harder. And it's important that we do not make too much joke, because this will actually prevent us from worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the way He's meant to be worshipped, and it will make it harder for us, inshallah. And for this, inshallah, I would like to end, inshallah. Anything khair, anything good I've said, inshallah, is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and any mistakes I've made, inshallah, is for myself, inshallah, and I would like to pass the mic to Brother Abdullah, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for listening.